When the news first broke about a self-charging electric vehicle coming out of Africa, many people dismissed it as just another headline meant to attract attention. After all, the automotive world has seen countless claims of breakthrough technologies that never truly make it past the prototype stage. But in this case, the story took a turn that no one was expecting. The inventor, Maxwell Chikumbutso from Zimbabwe, revealed that he had engineered an electric car that did not rely on traditional charging stations or fuel. Instead, it could generate its own energy while being driven, effectively eliminating the range anxiety and charging concerns that plague almost every EV owner around the globe. To test this incredible claim, a driver from the United States agreed to get behind the wheel and take the vehicle through real-life conditions. What followed was a journey that not only shocked the driver, but also sent ripples across the automotive and energy industries. The American driver was no stranger to electric cars. Having previously owned a Tesla Model S and even tested vehicles like Lucid Air and Rivian trucks, he considered himself well-versed in EV performance and limitations. He understood battery degradation, charging infrastructure, and the trade-offs between speed, range, and efficiency. So when he was invited to Zimbabwe to test Maxwell's creation, he carried both excitement and skepticism. Could an African-built car truly outperform the billion-dollar research efforts of Tesla, Toyota, or Volkswagen? Could this really be the future of transportation? The first impression was surprising. The car didn't look like a futuristic concept vehicle with wild curves and spaceship-like design. Instead, it resembled a practical four-door sedan, simple and modest, but with a quiet confidence in its build. Maxwell explained that the exterior design was secondary. The real magic lay beneath the body. Inside the car, the dashboard was equipped with a digital cluster, showing speed, range, and energy flow in real time. What caught the driver's eye immediately was the range meter, which displayed over 500 kilometers, even though the car hadn't been plugged in or refueled at all. The test began on a quiet road outside the city. As the driver pressed the accelerator, he immediately noticed the smooth and instant torque familiar to all EVs. But what stood out was the silence. It was even quieter than the Tesla. No vibrations, no noticeable gear shifts, and certainly no engine noise. Within minutes, the car was cruising at highway speeds. But here's where things started to get strange. Normally, in any electric vehicle, accelerating quickly or maintaining high speeds causes the battery percentage to drop rapidly. Yet, in Maxwell's car, the energy meter barely moved. In fact, after nearly 30 minutes of driving, the range had actually increased by a few kilometers. The American driver was stunned. He asked Maxwell for an explanation. The inventor described, in simplified terms, how the car used a combination of micro-energy generation systems and advanced converters that allowed it to continuously recharge itself while in motion. Unlike solar-powered vehicles that rely on sunlight or hybrids that still burn fuel, this system was fully independent of external energy. It didn't need charging stations, fuel pumps, or even solar panels. To the driver, it sounded almost impossible, like breaking the fundamental rules of energy. And yet, he was experiencing it firsthand. Curious to push the limits, the driver decided to take the car into more challenging terrain. Zimbabwe's countryside provided the perfect testing ground: long dusty roads, uneven hills, and stretches where traditional EVs would normally struggle due to limited infrastructure. Hours passed, yet the car continued without any need to stop for charging. At one point, the driver deliberately floored the accelerator, pushing the car to speeds over 100 miles per hour. Even under such stress, the battery percentage refused to drop as expected. He could only shake his head in disbelief. As night fell, the car's headlights illuminated the road, and the test continued. By then, the driver had already traveled well beyond the typical range of most commercial EVs, but the car still showed no signs of energy depletion. In fact, it seemed to perform better the longer it was driven. It was at this moment that the reality of what he was experiencing began to sink in. If this technology was real and scalable, it would not just change cars, it would disrupt the entire global energy industry. Oil companies, utility providers, and even governments that rely on fuel taxes would face unimaginable changes. The following day, the driver conducted another test, this time bringing his own diagnostic equipment to make sure there were no hidden tricks. He checked the car's wiring, battery output, and power consumption. Everything seemed legitimate. There were no hidden fuel tanks, no disguised charging devices, and no signs of external input. The energy flow diagrams consistently showed generation and consumption happening simultaneously, with a balance that kept the car powered indefinitely. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. Word began to spread quickly. Local journalists showed up, curious to witness the tests themselves. Some dismissed it as a publicity stunt, while others recorded the runs and shared them online. Within days, clips of the American driver marveling at the car went viral, sparking heated debates worldwide. Some viewers claimed it was impossible, accusing the videos of being doctored. Others argued that it was finally proof that Africa could lead the next wave of technological innovation. The driver himself, in interviews, admitted he had been skeptical at first but couldn't deny what he had experienced. One of the most shocking realizations for him was not just the car's ability to run without charging, but how stable and reliable it felt. Most prototypes feel rough around the edges, often with bugs, glitches, or limitations. But this vehicle performed with the refinement of a mass-market car, with smooth handling, comfortable interiors, and a responsive drive. It didn't feel like a fragile experiment. It felt like a finished product waiting to be scaled. The American driver later reflected on his experience, stating that it made him rethink everything he thought he knew about clean energy. While companies in the United States were still wrestling with charging networks and battery sizes, here in Africa, someone had leapfrogged those problems entirely. The implications were staggering. Imagine cities without gas stations, homes that never needed to connect to a grid for power, and transportation systems that never relied on fossil fuels again. The economic and environmental impact would be unprecedented. Of course, not everyone celebrated the breakthrough. Powerful industries stood to lose trillions if such technology became widespread. Whispers of corporate sabotage, political pressure, and attempts to suppress the invention began to circulate. The driver, aware of how revolutionary this was, admitted that part of him worried about Maxwell's safety and the future of his project. Innovations this disruptive often face fierce resistance, especially when they threaten established powers. But for the driver, the most unforgettable part was the feeling of freedom. For the first time, he realized what it meant to drive without worrying about gas prices, charging stops, or range anxiety. It was pure mobility, limitless, clean, and sustainable. The shock wasn't just in the technology itself, but in the realization that the future might not come from Silicon Valley, Tokyo, or Berlin, but from Africa. Weeks after returning to the United States, the driver continued to speak about his experience. He gave interviews, wrote articles, and even spoke at conferences, urging the world to pay attention to what he had witnessed. While skeptics continued to demand scientific validation and detailed patents, he remained firm in his conviction. He had driven the car, tested it himself, and seen the impossible become reality. What happened next shocked him even more. Instead of being embraced by mainstream media and industry leaders, his story was met with silence in some quarters and outright denial in others. Certain outlets refused to cover it, while others tried to discredit him. It became clear that powerful interests didn't want this story to spread too far. Yet, among grassroots communities, independent journalists, and innovation enthusiasts, the story of Africa's self-charging EV continued to grow. For the driver, it was no longer just about the car. It was about the potential for change, about believing in possibilities beyond what the world tells us is possible. He often recalled a moment during the test drive, when he looked out over the African horizon and realized that he wasn't just driving a car, he was driving a glimpse of the future. And that future, if allowed to flourish, would shock the world far more than anything else. Even today, his words echo, "I came to Africa thinking I'd test just another electric car. What I found instead was proof that the future doesn't belong to one continent, one corporation, or one government. It belongs to those brave enough to imagine the impossible and build it." As the weeks passed, the American driver couldn't shake the memory of the experience. Every time he got back into his Tesla back home, the familiar hum of the electric motor reminded him of what he had felt in Africa, but now it seemed limited. Plugging the Tesla into a charging station for hours felt archaic compared to the effortless, infinite drive of Maxwell's car. Friends and fellow EV enthusiasts asked him about the trip, curious if the rumors were true. At first, he hesitated to speak openly. After all, he knew how unbelievable it sounded. But eventually, he began to share the story in detail, and soon his words started to gain traction online. The shock was not just about the technology, but about where it came from. The world had grown accustomed to thinking that innovation only came from America, Europe, or Asia. Silicon Valley, Detroit, Munich, Tokyo. These were the places people expected breakthroughs. But here was Zimbabwe, a country often overlooked in conversations about global technology, producing a vehicle that defied the rules of modern engineering. That fact alone made people pause. Could it be that the future of clean energy and mobility was being written in Africa? The driver's accounts spread beyond EV enthusiasts. Environmental activists saw it as a game changer, something that could drastically cut carbon emissions worldwide. Economists speculated about the collapse of oil-dependent economies. Politicians quietly discussed the implications for energy independence. And while these conversations grew louder, so did the resistance. The driver noticed a subtle shift. Some of his interviews were mysteriously cancelled, articles he contributed to were edited heavily or shelved, and certain online platforms began flagging discussions about the car as misleading. This only deepened his belief that something monumental was at stake. He began to document everything he had seen, the drive logs, the energy readings, the conversations with Maxwell, because he knew history had a tendency to bury inconvenient truths. In private conversations, Maxwell himself admitted he was under pressure. Investors who once showed interest suddenly backed away, citing uncontrollable risks. Powerful individuals approached him with offers that sounded less like partnerships and more like attempts to buy and bury his technology. Yet through it all, Maxwell remained calm, almost serene. The world may not be ready, he told the driver one evening, but the truth cannot stay hidden forever. That phrase haunted the driver. He realized that the car was more than a machine, it was a symbol that human ingenuity could break free from the limitations imposed by powerful industries. A symbol that innovation didn't need billions in funding or the blessing of global corporations. It only needed vision and determination. Determined to spread the story, the driver began giving independent talks, often to small groups, universities, car clubs, and local innovation meetups. In every session, the reaction was the same: disbelief at first, followed by awe. People asked the same questions again and again. How does it work? Why isn't it everywhere? When can we buy one? And every time, he explained honestly that he didn't know all the technical details, but what he did know was undeniable. He had driven it, tested it, and seen it with his own eyes.
One particular talk stood out.
At a university in California, after his presentation, a group of engineering students approached him, inspired. They told him that whether or not Maxwell's exact design could be replicated, the principle of challenging the status quo mattered most. Even if the world tries to silence it, one student said, this kind of idea plants seeds. And seeds always grow. That moment gave the driver hope, that even if the path was difficult, the spark of change had already been lit. Meanwhile, Maxwell continued refining his prototypes, even as the pressure around him mounted. Rumors swirled that he was being monitored, that meetings were being disrupted, and that certain influential figures wanted to discredit him. Yet he pressed on, and the driver admired his courage. It wasn't just about making a car anymore, it was about fighting for the right to innovate freely. Back in the US, the driver was often asked what shocked him most. Was it the car's unlimited range? Its smooth performance? Its groundbreaking technology? His answer always surprised people. What shocked me most, he said, was realizing how quickly people dismiss what doesn't fit their narrative. We live in a world where billion-dollar corporations are celebrated for adding 5% more efficiency to a battery, but when someone creates something radically different, it's treated as impossible or ignored. That mindset is what truly shocked me. The story of Africa's self-charging EV remains unfinished. To this day, debates rage on, some calling it the greatest hoax in automotive history, others insisting it's the suppressed truth of our time. But for the American driver, there is no debate. He doesn't need reports, headlines, or corporate approvals. He knows what he experienced on that dusty road in Zimbabwe. He knows what it felt like to drive a car that seemed free from the chains of fuel and charging stations. He knows what it felt like to glimpse the future. And maybe that is the greatest shock of all, not the technology itself, but the realization that the future might already be here, waiting, and the only question left is whether the world will allow it to shine. Because sometimes, the most revolutionary ideas don't come from where we expect. Sometimes, they come quietly, from places the world has overlooked. And when they do, they remind us that true innovation has no borders. It belongs to those who dare to dream, and dare to build. The driver often replayed the test drive in his mind. There was one moment he remembered vividly. As he cruised along a long open stretch of road, the car humming effortlessly beneath him, he whispered to himself, "This shouldn't be possible." He glanced at the dashboard again and again, watching the range number hold steady, or even climb, when by every law of EV physics he knew, it should have been dropping. He later admitted that, in that instant, he felt like he was standing at the edge of a discovery that could redefine not only transportation but civilization itself. That night, as he sat with Maxwell in a small workshop lit by a single lamp, he asked the question that had been burning in his mind all day.
Why here, Maxwell? Why Zimbabwe?
Why not take this to America or Europe, where investors are everywhere? Maxwell leaned back, his face calm but resolute. Because here, no one told me it was impossible, he replied. In the West, they say energy can only come from certain sources. They spend billions reinforcing that belief. Here, I was free to think differently. And thinking differently is all I had. The driver sat in silence for a moment, stunned by the simplicity of the answer. In his world, innovation was tied to budgets, labs, and research facilities. But in front of him was a man who had created something revolutionary with far fewer resources, driven purely by imagination and determination. It made him question everything he thought he knew about progress. Over the next few days, he continued testing the vehicle under different conditions: steep hills, rough dirt roads, even stop-and-go traffic in city streets. Each time, the car delivered flawlessly. He took careful notes, recording mileage, acceleration, and efficiency, hoping to catch even the smallest inconsistency. But none came. It wasn't just a fluke, it was real. Word spread further, and soon the driver found himself answering questions from journalists, engineers, and even skeptics in online forums. Many demanded hard evidence, detailed schematics, or scientific publications. But those weren't in his hands. All he could offer was his personal testimony, backed by the hours he had spent behind the wheel. I drove it, he told them again and again. And it works.
Style, the résistance Grosstranger.
Online critics called it pseudoscience. Industry insiders dismissed it as a scam. Some went so far as to attack his credibility, claiming he was exaggerating or fabricating the story for attention. The driver laughed bitterly at these accusations. After all, he had nothing to gain by lying. If anything, speaking the truth only brought him more scrutiny. But he pressed on, determined not to let the experience be buried. Back in the United States, the contrast was painful. Every time he passed a gas station, he thought about a world where they no longer existed. Every time he saw people lined up at EV chargers, he remembered the freedom of driving endlessly without stopping. Every traffic jam, every smog-filled skyline, every argument over oil prices, it all seemed absurd now. He had seen what was possible, and living without it felt like stepping backward. At night, he would scroll through news articles, frustrated by how little coverage the story received in mainstream outlets. Instead, stories about minor EV updates, slightly bigger batteries, marginally faster charging times, dominated the headlines. He wanted to scream, "You're missing the real breakthrough. You're missing the car that doesn't need any of that." But the silence was deafening. One evening, he wrote in his journal, "Maybe the world isn't ready. Maybe the truth is too disruptive. But I know what I saw, and one day, others will see it too." Months later, he returned to Zimbabwe, drawn back by the memory of that impossible drive. Maxwell welcomed him again, this time showing him not just one vehicle, but several prototypes, each more refined than the last. It was clear that progress hadn't stopped. If anything, it had accelerated. The driver was awestruck. It felt like witnessing the early days of a revolution, hidden away in plain sight. During one of their conversations, he asked Maxwell if he was afraid. The inventor smiled faintly. "Of course I'm afraid," he admitted. "But fear doesn't stop me. Fear is the proof that what we're doing matters." That night, as the driver lay awake, he realized that fear was exactly what the world was feeling too.
Fear of losing control, fear of losing industry worth a trillion, fear of rewriting the rule.
And that fear explained why so many people wanted to deny, dismiss, or destroy the truth. But he also realized something else. No matter how hard they tried, the idea was already out there. And ideas are impossible to kill. For the driver, the biggest shock wasn't the car's technology, it was the courage behind it. Courage to imagine differently, to build despite the odds, to defy the voices that said it couldn't be done. That courage, he thought, was the real power source. And so when people ask him today what really happened when he tested Africa's self-charging EV, he tells them the truth, simply and clearly: I saw the future. I drove it. And it shocked me, not because it was impossible, but because it reminded me that nothing is. In the end, the American driver's journey was more than just a road test. It became a moment of awakening, a reminder that the limits we accept are often the ones we choose to believe in. Africa's self-charging EV was not just a machine, it was a statement that innovation can come from anywhere, even the places the world overlooks. What happened next didn't just shock the driver, it challenged the entire foundation of how we think about energy, technology, and the future. Whether the world embraces it or resists it, the truth remains: once you have seen the impossible with your own eyes, you can never go back to believing it cannot exist. The road ahead may be filled with challenges, but the spark has already been lit. And perhaps that is the most powerful fuel of all.